conversation with Graham is that it goes far beyond business strategy or leadership advice. We start talking about business, disruption, and transformation, but we quickly move into something deeper: how childhood, instability, environment, and life experiences shape the way we respond to change. Graham shares stories from growing up in a British Navy family, working in London during periods of political and economic upheaval, and helping launch companies and build a career around transformation and disruption. But underneath all of that is a deeper conversation about identity, instability, and reinvention, and the human side of change. This episode is part of a larger conversation. It's the first segment, and we really explore where that drive for change begins.
Guy with a funny accent. I started my career, I suppose, in London. I did my college degree in London after a brief stint in the music industry. We will not spend time on. Luckily, I don't remember most of it, as all people should not when they're in the music industry. But so I went to college in West London, and my college dissertation and my kind of project work, as it were, because it was a college that looked like Carnegie Mellon in the United States, it was all sponsored by industry, was with the UK government organisation that was doing this weird thing of formal methods for IT. So, really crazy things that people have never heard of, like project management. Because IT in the 70s was long-haired hippies in basements with punch card readers, and so they were bringing project management. We had another thing called process modeling, and wild idea. And the group that they worked around with the brilliant name of British Information Systems was the core of that whole thing in the worldwide industry. So people like James Martin and Ted Codd and Chris Date and people who are legends were all part of this tiny little group. And from then I went to Arthur Young, became Ernst & Young, and ended up spending 2 years in Ireland working with Tony Ryan when he was launching Ryanair. And as a result of that, Ernst & Young brought me to the US, predominantly to focus on Delta, because that was an Anderson account. In the old days, it was audit that ran the biz. And so I came over here to really focus on breaking Anderson's hold on Delta Airlines, and also working with another little Atlanta company called Coca-Cola as a consulting organization. So that's how I ended up in Atlanta. I'm probably a causer. A friend of mine always says there are people who suffer change, there are people who survive change, and there are people who cause change and disrupt. And I've always either hunted for change or I've caused it. And in general, people say, if you put me in something which is trucking along quite nicely the way it is, don't do that because I can't stand it, and I will break it just to figure out. They call it, what is it, break things fast or whatever. But it's always been my thing. So when things get formed and all the change is done, you get me the hell out of there, and you bring in the kind of people who actually, manage stable things, because if you leave me around, I'm just going to break it up again. And so, yeah.
Why do you think you're wired that way? What in your life has made you wired that way?
What a great question. There's a therapy question for you. I've actually been through that conversation. So this is what the professional head shrinkers say. So I grew up in a Navy family, and in the British Navy, certainly in the 60s and 70s, it's different to what I see in American service families. So deployments were long, right? Unless you go and live in a foreign country, most American deployments are actually very short. They're like 6 months, whereas they were 2 to 3 years. And so you didn't have that, what I would call stable family unit. When my father came in, he was a disruptor in our family because he was crazy in many ways. And so I never had that thing that people have. And so to some extent, I always had this wanting to do other things. And then I grew up on the south coast of England. I mean, a hell of a long way away from the big city of London. It was 72 miles. I think it's hilarious because when I moved to Atlanta, we lived 50 miles from the center of Atlanta, and everybody thought we were in the suburbs, right? And it's like, whereas in London, that was the other side of the world. And so to me, I was in this relatively boring environment with all the attraction of London, one of the top cities in the world, just down the street, with a a home life that wasn't surrounded by what I would consider to be stability. So I had that advantage that, what they call the burning platform idea, the Bunsen burner under the frog thing, was that there was always something else. And then I also lived in a country, unlike America, one of America's great things, where Britain does not exist, right? It is a global island. So it is an island that purely exists and has for 1,000 years by being connected to other places, whereas in the United States, everything you ever possibly wanted here is right here. And I forget what the data is, but was it like 75 or 80% of Americans don't have a passport? And by the way, on that 20% of people have a passport, half of those people are first-generation citizens, so they have to have one to get here. So unless you wander across the border, so literally 10% of Americans, and that changed dramatically in the last 10 years because now you need a passport to drive to Canada, and you need a passport to go to Cancun on vacation. I mean, 20 years ago you did not need a passport, you need a driving license to go to Cancun and go to Toronto. So now you don't do that. So I think it's just, so I came from a place which was always looking at other places, this tiny little place which is basically the size of Georgia and half of South Carolina with 56 million people, or 62 million now, full of multiculturalism everywhere you looked, and with a constant reference to the Commonwealth and all the other things. And so I think that's why you see so many, if you look at methodology and process and improvement things in the United States, it's shocking how many of those people pop up with a British accent. Because it's a different thing. And so, but I talked about my music thing. So I grew up, as it were, in the punk music, new wave music thing, and Americans didn't really see that because that was not a music movement; it was a political movement, and it was caused by, in 1976, right? For example, the Sex Pistols came out. There was 24% unemployment in 23-year-olds. And the country was falling apart. I mean, Maggie Thatcher was a result of the country literally falling apart. And so, again, the level of dissatisfaction with what is. So if you grow up in an environment where what is really nice, my grandkids have that. They're surrounded by family. Everything's hunky-dory. They have no aspirations to do anything particular or go anywhere. And why would they? Because they live in this, just south, northwest of Atlanta, and everything's fantastic, right? And so if you don't grow up in that, you don't have that natural, there must be something better thing. And so literally I went through therapy years and years and years ago, and they dug into the same thing. This is what they said. They said, where do you start? And what is it that incents you to do it? And once you get on that train, it's very difficult to get off. It's a roller coaster. So
if this conversation resonated with you, I think you'll connect deeply with my book, Learn to Love the Roller Coaster. The book explores what it really means to live through change emotionally, mentally, and professionally. Not just the external changes happening around us, but the internal ones too. The identity shifts, the fear, the uncertainty, the moments where life pushes us to become someone new. Because so many of us are carrying stories that shape the way we move through the world, whether we realize it or not. And when the world changes around us, those stories show up. You can learn more about my book and my work through Amplified Concepts in the links in the description. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it with somebody navigating change, and check out the other conversations that I have with Graham.